They did what? They reinforced them by helicopters? Like how? Uh-huh. Wow. All those men straight to the front lines by helicopters, huh? Yeah, I never heard of that before. Okay. September 23rd, 1951. There is a bloody fight in progress for yet another of the seemingly interminable nameless ridges of Central Korea. Did I say nameless? Well, this one at least gets a name on the UN side. They call it Heartbreak Ridge. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week, an accidental UN aerial attack against the Kaesong neutral zone prompted UN Commander Matt Ridgway to issue an apology and abandon his plan for taking Kaesong militarily. And both US 2nd Division and the 1st Marine Division began new offensives, not all that far away from each other. That ridge that 2nd Division is attacking, and that battle, have been given a name by the Western journalists: Heartbreak Ridge. For the US 2nd Division, the outlook was rather grim. The narrow Piari Valley, southwest of Heartbreak, was jammed with vehicles and exposed to enemy artillery and mortar fire. Korean civilian porters frequently abandoned their loads along the trails and bolted for cover when the enemy got too close. To keep the frontline units supplied with food, water, ammunition, and equipment, and to evacuate the casualties, often required that American infantrymen double as carriers and litter bearers. The rugged terrain and the close enemy surveillance of the approaches to Heartbreak Ridge made their jobs very hazardous and time-consuming, for it could take up to 10 hours to bring down a litter case from the forward positions held by the 23rd Regiment. On the 19th, 9th Infantry Commander John Lynch suggests that since the enemy's resistance is so concentrated, they should broaden the attack. He wants acting 2nd Division Commander Tom DeShazo to let him send his 1st Battalion across the Mundong-ni Valley to take Hills 867 and 1024, which are like 5 and 6 kilometers southwest of Hill 894, the southernmost crest of Heartbreak Ridge. This might lead the North Koreans to think that they're trying to surround the ridge from the west, and maybe they divert a bunch of their firepower to block such a challenge. DeShazo, though, nixes this since 10th Corps Commander Clovis Byers has ordered that Hill 931, the central and tallest crest of the ridge, be given top priority. On the 20th, Robert Young, the new permanent 2nd Division commander, arrives on the scene to take over from DeShazo. And he likes Lynch's plans for taking the two hills. He tells Lynch to attack Hill 867 today and then take Hill 1024 once that falls. In the interim, 8th Army Commander Jim Van Fleet tells Byers he wants 10th Corps' western flank brought into phase with 9th Corps to its left. So on the 22nd, Byers orders ROK, South Korean, 7th Division to take Hill 1142, which lies like 2 kilometers northwest of Hill 1024. Maybe those two attacks together would divert the North Koreans and lessen their resistance on Heartbreak Ridge itself. Maybe. Attacks the 21st and 22nd on the ridge by the 23rd Infantry have little in the way of success. Elements of 1st Battalion do actually manage to reach the top of Hill 931, but only briefly. A blistering counterattack by the North Korean 3rd Regiment from 12th Division literally decimates 1st Battalion, and they have to pull off the hill. We will see next week how the diversionary attacks go. This battle is as bloody as the battle for Bloody Ridge a couple of weeks ago was. The 23rd Regiment, whose show this battle was, left its blood along every step of the way up the ridge. Again, the fighting was close in, brutal, dangerous, while mortars and artillery punished each side without respite. Again and again, American companies of the 23rd fought their painful way up the slopes, blasting bunkers, killing enemy in their trenches, and again, reaching the crests exhausted and low on ammunition, they were knocked off by a howling charge of fresh North Koreans. Companies are whittled down to just 30 or 40 men, then replenished by inexperienced newcomers awaiting deployment in Japan. The UN forces are killing enemy soldiers at a pace of something like 9-1, but for the guys dying to do it, it's not a whole lot of satisfaction. Fehrenbach also writes, about one American company's fate to sort of show how the whole thing really is. A company under Captain Pete Montfort attacks towards a northern knob of the ridge. Despite the enemy's automatic weapons and artillery, and despite taking heavy casualties, they manage to take their objective as the sun goes down. The problem is that now they don't have that much ammo left, and in the dark under enemy fire, they can't get any brought up. Montfort radios that he's going to stay put. He is not giving up the position. The division orders a wall of steel put around their position, and Divarti, the divisional artillery, complies, firing all night long to erect such a wall. Despite this, the company is overrun and completely wiped out to the last man. Later, when a new company fought its way up to the position, they found the Americans sprawled stiffly along the crest. Pete Montfort lay across a machine gun that had run dry. There was not a round of ammunition remaining in any dropped rifle or in any bandolier. And the fighting has been that constant and that bloody on these ridges for a month now, since the Kaesong peace talks were broken off. UN Commander Matt Ridgway has a standing request to the communist side that, should peace talks resume, they do so at a new site, not Kaesong. This week, they finally answer him. Their response was a long, scathing document which said, in effect, that if the UN would stop bombing Kaesong, that place would be a suitable meeting site. However, the message also contained an implication that the communists might be ready to resume talks, and for that reason, Ridgway framed a restrained reply. After denying all but the one real bombing, he suggested that the liaison officers meet in Panmunjom to make arrangements to resume the talks. The communists responded with another document, repeating old charges of UN treachery and deceit, and stating in effect that there was no need for liaison officers to meet, that their senior delegates could resume talks in Kaesong. This really pisses Ridgway off, so he asked the Joint Chiefs for permission to denounce those allegations and to have his liaison officer really press for a new site. And if the other side refuses, he wants to be allowed to categorically refuse any more negotiations within the Kaesong area. This sends Washington into a minor crisis. The Joint Chiefs of Staff and the State Department agree that a categorical refusal for Kaesong meetings could lead to a permanent breaking off of the talks. So that's verboten. In fact, they say he can press his case, but not in a way that excludes a possible return to Kaesong. He has also to cut out the purple adjectives and truculent tone. Their words. The liaison officers are set actually to meet tomorrow. I will note here that Syngman Rhee, South Korean president, says they should not resume the talks at all until the Chinese have all left Korea. And I'd like to say yet more about some other peace talks. 2 weeks ago, we saw the San Francisco Peace Conference where the Treaty of San Francisco was signed, officially ending the state of war post-World War II between Japan and the Allies, or most of them. I talked some about the conference's relation to the Korean War last week. You know, that treaty is also called the Dulles-Yoshida Treaty, since it was negotiated by John Foster Dulles for the U.S. and Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida. There are several ways of viewing the treaty and what it means for the world. We heard the optimistic words for a future of East Asian peace from Ceylon's J.R. Jayawardena. We heard serious opposition to the treaty and the reasons for that from the Soviet Union's Andrei Gromyko. And here is another take, Isidore Stone's spin on what it means for the world, particularly for East Asia. It's quite long. It forced the victims of Japanese aggression to reconcile themselves to the rebirth of Japanese militarism. It was not so much a treaty binding up the wounds of World War II as a forced military alliance laying the basis for World War III. The Yalta Settlement, which had recognized Soviet sovereignty over the Kurils and South Sakhalin, was disregarded in the treaty. Japan renounced its claim to those territories. No mention was made of their ultimate ownership. Here were the seeds of future conflict with the USSR. At the same time, American policy strove to force Japanese recognition of Chiang Kai-shek, a step which would put Japan into hostile relations with communist China. Dulles had so far succeeded in this as to elicit a personal letter from Shigeru Yoshida pledging that Japan would not establish either economic or political ties with communist China. The treaty was thus laying firm foundations for irreconcilable hostility between Japan and its nearest and largest neighbors. Under circumstances as diplomatic as a steamroller, the treaty was signed, sealed, and delivered at San Francisco in 4 days. Well, here in 1951, that's just speculation, but it's certainly worth thinking about, looking at this from several sides and all, and how it might affect the future. Something else happens this week on September 20th that will likely affect the future. This day marks a significant turning point in the war. The strategy changes from a war consumed with perpetual movement to a conflict based on position. It had long ago been decided in Washington, D.C. not to fight for complete victory. And now, as the 8th Army has achieved extraordinary success and is beginning to peak, defensive lines become the new way of conducting the war. 10th Corps is to cease offensive attacks. The 1st Marine Division from 10th Corps has been in action since the 11th to gain several hills, which requires taking several well-fortified enemy positions first, including the Rock, a 4-meter-high granite knob, like 700 meters west of Hill 812. On the 19th, as the Marines hold the eastern half of it, helicopters bring in 6 tons of supplies in an hour. On the 20th, the fight for the Rock is fierce and in full swing, but what I just said comes into effect. General Van Fleet's order from last week places an immediate halt to 10th Corps' offensive operations. They will hold and reinforce their positions. Then on the 21st, something new and remarkable happens. The Marines introduce a new way of getting men from the assembly area to the front. This is Operation Summit. That morning, a contingent of Marines arrives on Hill 884 by helicopter to clear 2 landing sites to receive the first ever fighting force ever delivered by helicopter to an active battlefield. Once the zones are cleared, waiting helicopters go into action. Over the next 3.5 hours, 224 Marines and 8,000 kilos of stuff are transported 22 kilometers from assembly area to battlefield. A helicopter arrives above a landing site every 30 seconds and hovers there for 20, while 5 Marines in full gear slither 10 or so meters down ropes to the ground. This operation would have taken over 14 hours without helicopters and required extra laborers to carry the supplies. They also lay telephone lines with the helicopters, running some 15 kilometers between recon companies and command posts, and these take about 15 minutes per line. And with that evolutionary step in modern war, this week comes to an end. A week of fighting both for those Marines and for everyone at Heartbreak Ridge, but also an order to stop UN offensive operations. There is a pattern that's really starting to develop. There's fighting over a small disputed area, which becomes a true hellscape. Artillery like none seen ever before, blasting against single hills, single positions, day after day after day. The limitations of the fighting area mean that units are thrown in piecemeal, and once committed are savaged, if not cut to pieces, and then replaced. This is counter to American military doctrine. Think of the fighting this spring. Think of hitting the enemy in a dozen places and knocking him off balance, punching through here and there. But the men in the field do not have the authority now to attack along the entire front line, for the UN does not want military victory, it wants a truce. But it looks, this September, like the communist forces are willing to fight to the death over little patches of ground until forever? Are they? Maybe. Maybe so. It's depressing, but how is war not? And boy, the machinations upstairs get confusing, right? But we will be here week after week to try and sort it out. And hey, those of you who happen to be baseball fans should check out the latest episode of my podcast, Indy Neidell's Baseball History Time Machine, Part 3 of Sluggers of the 1940s. Well, you should check out all 3 parts, or the whole podcast, at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everywhere. Now, to make sure we can continue this fine Korean War coverage, join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. These are the newest commissioned officers in the Army, and Doug Stewart is the Army Member of the Week here. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time. Matt Ridgway to issue an apology. You need to apologize. Okay.